Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to Mindshifters Radio with your co-host, the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Ryce, and his wife, Jeanie. Michael and Jeanie share with you the wisdom of the ancient Aramaic internal process of forgiveness. They offer tools and support 5 days a week. They will support you in building a solid foundation within yourself to live in pure love. In Aramaic, Rakhma. Michael is the author of So Why Is This Happening to Me Again? For more information on Michael and Jeanie, please visit www.whyagain.com. And now your co-host, the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael and Jeanie Ryce.
To the brightness within you, and the truth that is rooted within me.
Hi, and welcome to Mindshifters Radio with the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Ryce. And today is, I think, day 183, but I'll have to look it up whenever the internet finally comes on, of our Memorial Day celebration. We're glad that you all joined us again today. We're starting off a new week. We're still here in Orlando, Florida. The call-in number is 646-200-4169. And if you're trying to get on the chat room, just hold on a minute because the internet is running slow here. We're actually sitting out in front of McDonald's. No, we're not eating here. Hold on. Here's Michael.
Welcome to the show, everybody. The vicissitudes of being on the road, and we're having trouble with internet connection. So the chat room is not up yet, but Jeannie's working on it as we speak. Actually, she's working on 2 different computers to try to get it operational. So we welcome you to the show post-Thanksgiving, and the Memorial Day honoring and Veterans Day is a request we make of everyone, and it's we're going to be redoubling the request today because of some things that we've just found out about. We'll be sharing with you in a moment, but the request is that each person be willing to look at one issue in your life, one situation, one circumstance where you are willing to be responsible for some form of possibility or fear that is coming up in you that needs to be healed. Excuse me, but my phone just clicked in. Anyway, the idea of the honoring of Memorial Day is to support the completion of the whole process of war on planet Earth, to put an end to that process and create a world where each human being lives in responsibility and in a state of inward peace, where there is no hostility or fear left within them. Of course, that seems like the impossible dream, and without the tools, it is absolutely the impossible dream. However, we now have decoded from the ancient Aramaic language what the man named Yeshua was actually teaching about forgiveness. And in no way, shape, or form was he teaching us to let other people off the hook because we had some kind of pain or turmoil or trauma in us. He was teaching us the tools which to go inside ourselves and remove that pain and turmoil and trauma. And we are here to support you in that process. If it's a new conversation to you, we invite you to go to the website, whyagain.com, and on the right-hand side, there's a link that says Download Worksheets. The first 5 links will give you the whole story on how the internal process of forgiveness works, how to go inside yourself and delete all hostility or fear and stand in the space of your human life, stand in the space of your aliveness. You know, if we ask people about their experience of a newborn child, everybody's experience is the same. Human life is the awesome, active presence of love, and everybody gets it when they hold a newborn. So, what would the world be like if you could stand in the space of your newbornness 24/7, 365, no matter what anybody else is doing? And most of the world says, yes, but they make me so mad, they make me so sad, they make me so afraid, they make me. And I'd offer that's the biggest lie ever told. You know, Hitler used to say, make the lie big enough and tell it often enough and people will believe it. Well, the big lie is that anybody could make you anything. You are what you are because of what's going on inside of you. If you're in fear, if you're in anger, if you're in rage, if you're in hatred, if you're in vengeance, whatever it is, it's yours. And there's a technology. There is a way to remove that. There is a way to forgive that. So our invitation to you is to bypass the brainwash of the culture that says what's going on inside of you is about anything else but what's going on inside of you. The mind makes up all kinds of ways to turn and run and all kinds of stories to justify its running so that it does not have to face whatever it is at the root of the pain and the turmoil and the trauma. We're here to create a space of support for working through those things. And Jeanie, are we on the chat room?
Chat room's not up yet, but the switchboard's up and Tim's on.
So the switchboard is on. Tim, how are you today, Dr. Tim?
Doing very well, thank you. Happy Monday.
And to you, we're delighted to have you back with us. We've missed you the last several days.
Yes, I was busy with a lot of family stuff and getting together with friends and family for the holidays and slowing down a bit. So,
well, did that give you opportunities to learn forgiveness?
Oh, I had a few here and there. Yeah. I'm doing the 5-a-day commitment that they started last Monday. So
am I.
So
am I, and it's been awesome. It's been a while since I've done that, and it's really been awesome. There are actually some changes going to come to this latest worksheet as a result of that. We'll be posting it on the site within the next couple of days. But, yeah, it's been fabulous. What kind of insight and process has your 5 worksheets today been leading you to, Tim?
Well, I had just a lot of things. I had 5 days where I didn't work, so I just spent with family and all kinds of different things in the process of doing. What did it turn out to be? 35, 38, 40 worksheets in this period of time.
Yeah, and last night was completed.
And one of them was I was with a family where they've got a 1.5-year-old, and he was sitting eating, and then he started to cough. He was right next to me, and he started to cough, and it was pretty apparent that he had something go down his windpipe.
Right.
So he just kept coughing, and now what I've learned about this over the years is if they're coughing, that's a good thing because air is still coming in and out.
Right.
And so I raised his hands above his arms and was getting him out of his chair and was willing to do the Heimlich for him if he needed it. And his dad came over. Excuse me. So his dad came over, and I relinquished control at that point, and his father took him, about 8 feet, 9 feet away from me and was holding him and patting his back. And then his grandmother came over, and she was even more agitated and concerned. And she eventually did the Heimlich with him and got a little chunk of noodle out of his windpipe.
Uh-huh.
He'd never passed out or anything. But I was in the process when this happened of doing a series of worksheets. I was just sitting there at the table doing some worksheets. And so I decided to do a worksheet on this process. And what it took me back to was there was a time when I was probably 12 years old, and we went to visit a family friend, and he was a champion swimmer, and he and his brother were, their room was full of trophies. So we went out to the local lake to go swimming. And Cliff dove in the lake, and his brother was, still taking his shoes off, and Cliff didn't come up. And he was kind of floating there. He kind of looked like he was, holding his breath to explore the bottom or whatever. And his brother said, go ahead, somebody got him up, give him a little shove in the butt, kick him, get him up here. So I went over and just gently nudged his rear end with my foot, and he didn't move. And then his brother sprang into action and got him up and got him to the Heimlich and whatever. And not the Heimlich, but at that point, way back then, it was CPR with moving the arms and pushing, and well, he had broken his neck when he dove into the water.
Oh my God!
And he died 3 days later. And what came up for me in that worksheet and several worksheets I've done since then is that even though I do a lot to study and read and be prepared, and often if I'm the only one around, I will take action in a crisis, and people often call me level-headed in a crisis, there have been times when I've kind of frozen or held back, and in this case, if I'd been there alone with this baby, I would have just done the Heimlich on the baby. I mean, I knew that's what needed to happen. But since there was somebody else there, it kind of put me in this, in a reaction, and it stirred up a reaction inside, and I remembered as I was doing the worksheets through my tears that it was because I had done this silly little thing of, kicking this young man because his brother told me to, and it was, it was an innocent enough maneuver, but he was laying there in the water desperately needing help, and I didn't know it. And so all of those emotions about, you did the wrong thing, if you act the wrong way, if you don't, whatever. So there were quite a few tears and releases about that. So that was a nice healing, and it gave me some insights into some of the worksheets I've done since then of different situations in my life where I've held back if other people are watching. If I'm alone, I act and things get solved, but if there's somebody else there, as in this case, the older brother was there telling me what to do, and it didn't go well.
Right. And what age were you at that when that happened?
About 12. I was
12.
about 12.
Wow. That's pretty heavy duty.
Yeah. And so, thank you to that little baby for choking on a little piece of pasta and giving me the chance to bring that up and do some release work on that.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful, and it's awesome how the world serves us in every turn, at every turn. When they used to say they said the student is ready, the master will appear, and that's because the master is always there in any situation where we're willing to forgive. We can start to go back and remove those and delete those things that hold us out of our human lives and keep us in turmoil and trauma. So, awesome piece of work, sir.
Well, and the other point of it is that if I hadn't been, in this process of doing 5 worksheets a day, I probably wouldn't have thought about doing a worksheet on this because it all got resolved, but I happened to be right there working on worksheets when this happened, so I said, well, let me throw this out here and see what comes up here, and it just took me, just in a heartbeat, took me right back to this tragedy that happened when I was 12, so.
Yeah, wow,
so
that's powerful.
Another testimonial to being in the process and making, being actively doing worksheets every day. It's like a lot of the other techniques I teach. I tell people the more you do them, even when you're not having a crisis, the more you'll benefit and the more you'll think of it when a crisis comes up.
Exactly, yes. Well, I had an interesting happening. I've been doing them, started as David had invited us all to do. Let's see, that's 5, 8. So that's 8. We're in the 8th. Yesterday was the 8th day. So I think it was worksheet 40 last night. And the last couple of worksheets that I did, the first several days, they were just kind of, little things. And, there wasn't much going on for me to do worksheets around, but I picked some situations. And last night, I went into touching into thinking about some of the things, and interestingly, you talk about being 12. It was probably a little younger for me, but just thinking back to and doing worksheets around some of the things I did as a kid that today I would think were so bizarre and insane. As they say, the things kids did. And the piece that brought so much, a great deal of emotion up for me, and that really opened a space for me was actually in about the third to the last worksheet last night, was touching into being a small child and why didn't they tell me who I was? Why didn't they tell me that I was love so that I could function as love, instead of all the projections, all the stories, Dad's story about his life projected onto a small child, Mom's story, sister, brother, why didn't they just start out and tell me who I was? And how many years of insanity and pain and suffering went down until I discovered who I was, and then how much longer until I worked through all the insane beliefs I had about myself to where I could actually, entertain and live out of that space of being as a human life. And so it was a series of very powerful and very interesting worksheets to me to get to that. Why didn't we just start out there? Why didn't they just tell me, instead of telling me all these other stories that now I have to work through in order to get back to a human life? So that was kind of my gift last night from my 8th day of 5 a day.
Well, it sounds powerful.
It was very powerful. It was very powerful to touch into the emotion behind that, the grief. There was grief and loss. For me, for all the years, I didn't function as a human being. I didn't function out of the active presence of love. And what a loss it is when we have a potential for a human life, and that so-called human life functions out of rage and fear and pain and trauma and grief and loss. And we actually went to visit with some friends at a church yesterday afternoon. We weren't speaking anywhere, and there was a young man whose wife had passed away, and he was planning to move out of state. His parents were here in Florida, and he was going to move out of state to go and be where he was in the process of adopting a child, and the child went back to be with his grandparents. His wife, who had just passed away, was her child from another relationship. And it was interesting to hear this dad who, just wants his son to stay around and have his grandson here, and they're going back to Ohio. And to hear the words that, my son, I just give up. I'm just not going to talk to him anymore. He just doesn't listen. He just doesn't do what I want him to do. And it's like, well, but maybe he's got a life to lead, and maybe his guidance is on track. And it was interesting to hear his response. And his response was, this is a man who's, very churched and very churchy and very, born again and all of that. But his words about his son who wouldn't listen to him were, well, I have a gun and bullets. I was like, what? You'd actually even, and he didn't say it in a joking way, although I hope he was joking, but you'd even think such a thought simply because your son won't do what you want him to do as an adult man? How bizarre is this? And who didn't tell you that you were loved? Who didn't tell you how to function as a human being? And sadly, that's the game of the world, is we've been told that we're, these human gettings, these human doings, these human blamings, these human forcings, these human manipulators, rather than human beings. And anybody who questions what a human being is, just go hold a newborn. And forgiveness is about removing anything that's unlike your newbornness so that you function as that no matter what anybody around you is doing. I guarantee that's the most brilliant, the most capable, the most powerful space you could possibly be in, whatever's happening in your life. I promise that rage and fear and grief and pain won't serve you nearly as powerfully as living as the active presence of love. And what if our children started out as that, and we told them that, and we told them that, and we told them that? I think about in the classroom when I say to people, what kind of messages did you get from your family? Oh, well, I'm stupid. I'll never be anything. I should have been a boy, or I should have been a girl. Oh, I'm the problem in the family. My family, we actually had a woman who was in a workshop a few weeks ago, and so, my father told me when I was about 6 that I had ruined their whole family by coming into the family. And it's like the messages of pain from those who don't have the tools to resolve their pain that they give to the next generation just perpetuates the insanity. And it's time for us to undo that insanity. So I certainly appreciate you, Dr. Tim, for being on the team and support. Is David with us today? Yeah? No, David was going to be on the show, but he may be caught in another phone call right now. The thing I started the show with and said we'd talk about a little later. There was a young man at Heartland about 5 years ago who had, he was a little bit mentally challenged, emotionally challenged, had difficulty speaking, so was the kind of kid who'd been picked on a lot, told he was stupid, although he was actually very capable with his hands and very capable with his inventiveness. He was a really inventive kid. I think about him often for some things that he did when he was at Heartland. He was actually there doing a short-term work support program. But having gone through all of the abuse that he went through, his main theme when he was at Heartland was a lot of anger, a lot of rage. And so we worked with him, and he opened a space where he was able to break through to some kind of a connection to who he was as a human being, to the love that he was. And he'd already made up his mind. As I say, he was there for a short-term program. He'd already made up his mind that he was, he didn't want to be there. He was trapped there. He was, his dad forced him to go because he was in trouble, and he was out of there. And he had a still point session right toward the end of his last few days there where he had this major, major opening, and it was awesome. But his carbon-based memory, his mindset was still, I'm out of here. My father forced me to be there. I'm not staying here. Even though, in his words, I actually talked to Ari this morning. I've been phoning everybody that was there that year to ask their support for the family because this young man 2 nights ago committed suicide, hung himself. And Ari reminded me that, even as this young man was running away, he acknowledged and spoke about the miracle that he had just experienced of who, connecting to that love, but wasn't willing to stay around long enough to work through the pain that he'd gone through as a kid with all the abuse that he'd taken from his culture. And so I'm just asking everybody who's on the show today to keep your breath open. And if this brings some things up for you, we'll ask you. I've done a couple of worksheets on it already today. If this brings anything up for you, I ask you to do your work and your forgiveness around whatever surfaces. This young man was about, he was 25. And so we certainly see this young man, his name is Zach. We see him in the light. We hold him in love. We hold him in the presence of that love that as he moves on, he can go directly to the light, which is what we're designed to do when we leave our bodies behind. But more importantly, or just as importantly, is that what had happened with Zach was that he had gotten himself in some difficulty and just decided, I guess, the easiest way out was to hang himself. And that's what he did. And his brother, who was 16 months older than he was, had just come back from 3 tours of Iraq. And he found him and had to cut him down. And so that young man just needs such huge love and support. His name is Chris. And so we ask you to please hold the space for Chris and for Dad, who I spoke to this morning. His name is Art. He's someone who started doing the work about 10 years ago. And so this family is just in such trauma and such pain that if each one of us can work through whatever trauma and pain we might have around hearing this, if we can forgive so that we show up in the energetic space as the active presence of love, we can bring healing to this family and to the dynamics that might just be the thing that saves Chris's life, the second son who found his brother And Dad spoke about how he'd been working with a veterans group that had been working with suicidal veterans. We spoke about this on the show a couple of months ago with David. He quoted the statistic that 18 Iraqi veterans are committing suicide every day in America. They come home here and they have such painful realities. They're committing suicide at a rate of an average of 18 a day. And I know, Tim, you've worked in this arena. So Dad, Art, is working with this group. And we certainly hold a space for Chris. Dad didn't speak of a concern for Chris, but 3 tours of Iraq and finding his brothers got to be a tough and painful place to be. And so I just ask everybody on the show, if you would, to just take a couple of deep breaths and be here with us as we think about these 3 people. And, of course, I don't know Mom, but Mom was the one who picked Zach up and brought him to her home after he got himself into a little bit of a scrape, and then went on to do something else, and he hanged himself in her home. So if you'd each just join me in holding space for this family. And how we each do whatever work we need to do to resolve whatever this brings up in us, so that we can be that space, so that we can hold to the active presence of love, because that's the healer. That's what we're here to do. And there's so much trauma, so much pain going on in the world. And as I said, I'd spoken to David a little while ago. Oh, David's with us. Good. Okay, David, welcome to the show. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. I've been on for the whole show. I don't know why I didn't show up, so I just decided to call back in, and then I went ahead and pressed one with it. So I'm doing pretty well.
Okay.
So I've been listening.
Yeah, so you weren't showing up.
Yeah, so I've been listening to the whole show, and as you and I talked about this morning about Zach, and for some of the audience, well, then they know that one of my sons, who's 36 years old, died September the 18th. And though it wasn't, as may seem, the act of hanging oneself, he did overdose on drugs in a recreational way, is how some people would like to talk about it. And it's really what happened. And I was I talked with Michael on several occasions about how much pain and trauma that he must have been in to resort to that. And I knew Zach. I worked with Zach, and it really opened up some additional levels of grief and sadness and around that. And I'm going to be calling his father and his brother and see if I can offer, and I'll offer my support. And one of the things that Michael and I talked about was in James Allen's book, As a Man Thinketh, and we could put it as a man or a woman thinketh. And I would like to read a little bit from his book, Michael, if I just a moment. And I changed this to a first person rather than he and man and so forth, because it's all the same. It says, a strong person can only help a weaker person when the weaker person is willing to be helped. And even then, the weak person must become strong of themselves. They must, by their own efforts, develop the strength which they admire in another. And only you can alter your condition. And we talk about doing the 5 worksheets a day for the 40 days. And Tim was talking about, had he not been committed to or agreed to doing the 5 worksheets, he may not have done worksheets around that particular incident. And I concur with that that had I not been doing my work over the years, then with this event in my life, then the challenge in order to work through it and to process through it and do the healing, and with the support of this radio audience and Heartland participants and anyone and everyone that does any type of forgiveness work, then I don't know how I would have gotten through it. Not that I'm really through it yet, and it is an ongoing process with it. We talk about the Memorial Day, we talk about doing the worksheets, and there's more tools than just the forgiveness worksheet. There are several tools that are there, and just the commitment. And I like what James Allen says about this. A strong person can only help a weaker person when the weaker person is willing to be helped, and even then the weak person must become strong of themselves. They must, by their own efforts, develop the strength which they admire in another. And so often when they're going to workshops or listening and hearing people on TV and videos and watching their success and admiring that, yet unwilling to do what it is that's necessary to be responsible for their own lives and their own feelings of what it is that comes up for them. So maybe we could check in the chat room and we see if there's anyone else that's on the call, and invite everyone to take this worksheet in hand and to just begin with it and just do it regardless of what your mind may be telling you. Just take a worksheet and do it. So that's where
it is. It is definitely a way to grow in strength, and I think it's James Allen that speaks about strength to strength, and we will at last grow divinely strong, and that's something we talk about in our On Creating Consciously workshop. And the idea of this work is to tap you into your divine strength and your true being. And David, I really acknowledge you with what happened with your son, that instead of succumbing to the pain or the rage or the grief, that you kept raising above that and doing your work, forgiving, letting go. I just really, truly, totally, completely acknowledge you for how powerful you've done that. And, of course, you'll be strengthened and empowered to, I'm sure, be of support with Art and with his son Chris, having had both experiences of being a combat vet and having your son pass. So we definitely hold the space, and Jeanie does tell me that there are a couple of callers in the chat room. So, Jeanie?
The first one is area code 312. You're on the air. And the other caller, please call back.
Okay, 312, and then the other call we'll take as soon as we're complete with 312. You're on the air. Give us a name. Where are you calling from? Hello, 312. You are on the air.
What did she say?
Oh, okay. Is that you, Ari?
Yeah, it's Ari.
Oh, awesome. Welcome to the show, Ari. We haven't heard your voice on the show in a while. For those who don't know Ari is raw food chef, or actually all the way around, chef extraordinaire, who has helped us to set up our menus at Heartland, and the awesome food that comes out of our kitchen is all Ari's fault. And we're so delighted you're on our team, Ari. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was calling about Zach as we talked this morning, and I had the opportunity and honor, and also lesson learned with Zach. And when you spoke about kind of that one time when he had his breakthrough, that he did always want to leave, and he said he didn't want to be there, and he was being held there, and all sorts of things he complained about. And I was a little nervous about him being in the kitchen with me, just because he was so negative about everything. Do I really have to do this?
He carried a load of pain, didn't he?
Yeah, and I was like prepared for him in the kitchen, because once in a while people come in that way, and I'm like, well, that's no way, or you're going to have to shape up, or you're not going to. And he came into the kitchen just so willing to do more than I would ask on his own, by far. And if you remember, he used to pile his plate. We made him eat last. We didn't make him. But if he would go through the aisle first, he would finish entire bowls made for 20 people. He'd pile it on his plate. Do you remember that by himself? He's like, and you could get as much as you wanted, but he would pile his plate like each one was the Last Supper kind of thing.
Yeah.
And he seemed to enjoy it, himself very well.
About that.
Remember that?
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I recall about him most is his genius. If you remember that screen that we used to keep the vegetables underwater when we're ozonating them, that was his invention, his creation, and he had such a genius about him, but came up in a culture, very much like my nephew Kevin, because of his handicaps, which were minor, but still were enough to have him made fun of and be picked on, and the burden of that was just, and the anger over that was just more than he could bear. And I just so wish that he had stayed. I begged him, please, you just started your work, you're just opening, please stay, do your work, please. And that was actually what my worksheet was about this morning, after I heard from his dad, was my own shortcoming in not being able to inspire him to continue to do his work. He created an awesome opening and an awesome space, as you spoke about with that breath session that he did, and that he was unwilling to follow through. And how do we inspire people who don't have the brain cells to recognize what it is they need to work through, and then the willingness to stay around and do it? It's
well,
I
I'm sorry. I almost felt like that when he got that, and everyone saw it in his face after the breath work, and he felt differently.
Yeah.
It almost, because it was unfamiliar, frightened him. Because that's the next day when he got so scared and started even walking around more and more. Right after the breath session, he wanted to leave more and more after he felt so good.
Yep.
And kind of
acted. Of course, when we hit, and that's one of the confusing parts of people doing their work, if they haven't been around long enough to have built the brain cells, is when they hit that new level of aliveness and that new level of vitality, they're more empowered to take out the next layer. And ultimately, the layers that we're taking out, what we're doing is literally cleaning out the generations. If any one of us thinks about, I sat back and watched my dad or I watched my mom, what kind of rage and fear and pain did they carry? And grandpa and grandma and great-grandma and great-grandpa, that's all genetically born and bred in us. And that if we finally choose to do our work and rise above that we've got to allow that to open in order to work through it, in order to let it go. And it's certainly not Dr. Feelgood and trying to get people to understand that is such a challenge, because the next level of opening means I touch into the next level of pain I need to work through.
Exactly. Yeah. And back to what you said about that simple screen. We work with that thing for years, doing goofy things, thinking of complicated things, all sorts of things. And he's like, oh, this is easy. When you speak of that someone's handicapped, or we thought maybe a little simpler, but yet he got the job done, and we still use that same method now, and it's so simple, cheap, and easy. Anybody could do it. So it was kind of, but no one did. Was the whole point. And
we're using exactly the same piece of equipment that Zach built 5 years ago when he was at Heartland.
Exactly.
Because it was, and his genius, his ability was amazing. But it actually, if you remember Kevin, my nephew, who had similar verbal skill difficulties and such, speech impediment, and I so am in thanksgiving about Kevin, because when he first came to Heartland, he came out of duress and he had attempted suicide. This is my nephew. And his sister, or his mother, who was my sister, called me and said, you've been telling me for years to send Kevin to Heartland. Okay, we're ready. And he came. And fortunately, he spent about 5 years there and really did his work. Now, I would have had Kevin still staying there longer, because he's gone back home, and he's living a rather cloistered life, but he's living a happy life. He's living a life where he isn't carrying that load of trauma. He's stuck in long enough. Here's a kid who couldn't read. He had a speech impediment and standing in front of a group. And I don't know if you remember, Ari, when Kevin got up in teacher's training and presented a whole lesson in teacher's training. And I don't know if you ever knew this, but when he got back to Canada, he went into a training program and in a school for some job retraining. And he actually put a group together in that school of other kids who had had difficulty, and he was in front of the classroom teaching forgiveness and reading the book, Why Is This Happening to Me Again?, to these kids who couldn't read. And here's a kid with a speech impediment that wouldn't say a word in front of, if there were two people, he wouldn't say a word. But he worked through that. And we can work through these things, and thank God that Kevin chose to do that, and we hold a space for Zach as he moves on from his body, that he goes directly to the light and is able to let go of those shadows and that darkness that plagued him from his childhood in a world that didn't function out of as human beings. It's a tragedy and a travesty, and it's all too common, and we're here to support the healing of all of those dynamics on planet Earth, because they're the kinds of dynamics that lead us ultimately in the extreme to war. And we're here to put an end to it. So, Ari, anything else to share?
No, that was just kind of was my thoughts about, like I said, he was just, he was very, and I guess the other thought was, what I learned was, you really don't know the situation. He was complaining about work and everything else, but he seemed to just love, he loved being in the kitchen, which I would have, never thought. And he was very, very strong, as you remember. So he would lift the heaviest, it's a 60-pound sack of, where do you want the 60-pound sack of whatever it was, cabbage. Just throw them up. It was like, okay, good. It was, and he didn't, it didn't mind. Just like when he looked at it and he saw our problem, he's like, I'll fix that. It's giving people the opportunity to feel their own goodness. And I think that was part of me doing some of that stuff. He felt really good about it. And everyone was like, boy, this is great. And that's feeling your own goodness and allowing it in. So I would say that too is what I remember as a gift from him is, no matter what state, maybe you have a speech impediment, maybe you have this, but your gifts are really, if people take them in, I mean, everyone has gifts to give, and everyone gives gifts, but a lot of us are not open to, or sometimes I'm not open to receive them. And, he just broke my wall down. I was like shocked when he walked in that kitchen. I'm all set for him, and he was 100% the opposite. And I was like, okay.
Yeah, he had such a sweet heart and carried such a burden of rage over the pain he'd been put through, and very much like my nephew Kevin, almost the same identical circumstance. Very, very sweet being, but the world didn't support it. And, I'm reminded of the line in the song about Vincent van Gogh, the world was never meant for one as beautiful as you. But guess what? If we start to show up as human beings and we forgive the hate, the fear, the anger, the pain, the trauma, the rage, then you become the beauty that shows up and makes the world a safe space to experience who you are and your goodness. And we're here to tell you that you are the awesome active presence of love. If somebody's told you something different, it's a lie. And if you feel from that lie and you believe that lie, then it's hard to feel, as Ari puts it, your goodness. It's hard to feel who you are. And that's where the forgiveness process comes in, that we go in with the tool of forgiveness. And again, if you're not familiar with that conversation, if you haven't been on the show long enough, or you haven't been to any of the workshops or the DVDs or CDs, please go to the website, whyagain.com, and on the right-hand side there's a link that says download worksheets. Please, please, please download that worksheet and do it, and then do it, and then do it, and then do it. And what you'll find is delight in uncovering the parts of your mind that hold pain and being freed from them. It's awesome. It's wonderful when we introduce little kids to this, because they very, very quickly get an understanding of, I can relieve myself of this pain. And they'll run to mom and dad when they're in pain and say, Mom, Dad, I need a worksheet. We need as adults to start to recognize that. Jeanie?
Yes, we've got some conversation going on in the chat room and some questions. We do have someone from 517, that's Michigan. So if you'll just hold on just a moment and let us address what's coming up in the chat room first, and then we'll turn you on. There's two different conversations happening, but I feel like they kind of revolve around the same thing. One was, actually three. One was one person who was talking about that they realized their self, and they put that in quotes, was when they gave birth to their child. And I said, yes, that's the actual description of being. And then they went on to talk about how they didn't want to repeat the same patterns in their life. They wanted something different for their sons, and that forgiveness came later. So that brought up to discuss what real forgiveness is, that it's going inside, removing what doesn't belong. It's not letting someone else off the hook. And then another conversation came along that they had some issues in their life that involved incest, and that they said they forgave them, but they didn't really feel like they had forgiven. So that kind of ties in the same thing again, to talk about forgiveness. And then the last one, this person is talking about some dreams that they've had that are real disturbing and everything, and trying to figure it out. And I told them that figuring it out was the pseudo-solution, that it wasn't really the important thing was not trying to figure out what the dream meant or what it was trying to explain, but doing worksheets around what it was bringing up for them personally. So there again, it's talking about the forgiveness. And they all kind of felt like they were off topic with what you were talking about, but I think the whole thing is on topic. So, and for the person that had dreams, I had an awful dream last night. And so it's working through the worksheets. It took me 7 worksheets this morning to get through what that dream brought up for me. And some of the things it brought up didn't have anything to do with the dream whatsoever. And so instead of trying to figure out what the dream really means, it's working on what it's bringing up for you at the moment. And so, Michael, if you'll address the worksheets, and I know we've talked about that, but that's what this show's about.
Yeah, when Jeanie talks about the pseudo-solutions in our codependence to interdependence workshop, we point out that there are 7 different what I call pseudo-solutions. And one of the pseudo-solutions is, if I could just figure this out. People spend their whole lives trying to figure it out, and it isn't worth the powder to blow it to hell. Pardon my French. Instead of trying to figure out your dilemma, your situation, or the why of it all, forgive. And forgiveness is the technology that comes out of the ancient Aramaic language, with which you crack open the part of your mind that's holding hidden pain. That part of your mind contains not just the pain of your life, but the pain of all your generations, mom and dad, and mom and dad's moms and dads, and theirs before them. That is the frequency contained within the cell, called genetics. You know, when the geneticists first started to talk about genes, they told us that 95% of the DNA was junk. Well, excuse me, it's not junk, it's your whole family history. And if in your family history there's pain, there's trauma, there's turmoil, then you will be attracted to circumstances and situations with which that pain and trauma and turmoil will surface. As it surfaces, if you're willing to forgive, rather than blame it on current circumstance. The problem is that old traumas, like, you know, Dr. Tim shared with us a powerful worksheet that he did over a small child getting a bit of spaghetti caught in their throat. And that brought up a trauma that went back to when he was 12 years of age. Now, Dr. Tim, you don't know him, but, you know, he's been around a long, I mean, he's at least 30. So he's been carrying that trauma for a few years. And what happens is it stays under the surface. In the Aramaic, there's a word for those things that stay under the surface but control our behavior and our perception. It's actually a suffix that you add to a word, that they understood this so well that this uta, the word O-O-T-A, or the suffix uta, was added to a word that said that there was something under the surface that was controlling perception and behavior. And as Tim said, here I was, and Tim's a therapist. Tim's an extremely qualified man. And if somebody else is watching, what does he do? He holds back what he knows he can do. That's the uta brain cells. That's what happens in all of us when there's something under the surface that we haven't resolved. And what happens with forgiveness is you crack open that hidden part of the mind. Otherwise, the more you swear you will never do that to your kids, the more you re-energize that very thing that you will ultimately do to your kids, or you'll spend your life struggling not to do. I remember working with a man in South Florida last year, and this man was involved. He'd been sober for 35 years, alcoholic, sober, actually working with a lot of people around sobriety. And he was very proud of himself. He'd come from a family system where his father was extremely physically abusive. But, he'd done his work, and all was well because he had never abused his children. And when I presented him with the question of, you've been sober for 35 years, you've never hit your kids, but how often do you still struggle with the desire to hit? And it's like, I dropped the bomb. Oh, my God. Yeah, I struggle with that every day. Right. That's the uta brain cells that if we hold it in a dissociated state, it's going to run our lives. Now, fortunately, he had enough strength to refrain from following those brain cells, but 35 years he's still fighting to stop from hitting people because that's what his power person did. Forgiveness is the tool with which you go in and you crack open that dissociated part of the mind that contains a behavior. If there's a behavior in there, if there's a feeling in there, if there's a reality in there, you can't stop. You can't change it because it's not yours to change. And when you come into a current situation and you hook it up to that external situation, you redouble the ability or the inability to touch into that part of your mind. What forgiveness, what actual forgiveness does, it's got nothing to do with letting other people off the hook because that old pain or that old trauma is in you. Forgiveness is the tool with which you crack open that dissociated mind. You get back directly in touch with that which was too painful to handle at the moment you dissociated from it. And then, because in the space of that opening, you bring the active presence of love, things start to shift and change. That's the process of forgiveness. That's how, when I say, I never want to do this to my kids, I forgive and I remove this. Because if the this that I don't want to do remains in a dissociated part of my mind, sooner or later my kids are going to trigger that. And unless I have great strength of character, it's going to take over, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. If you go back into the ancient Aramaic physics language, the physicists in the Aramaic said, the sins of the fathers will be passed into 3 and 4 generations. That was not a threat. That was not, you're going to get blamed, you're going to get punished for what your fathers did. It was just telling you how your hard drive works, how this energetic system called the body works, and that all those things are stored within your structure. Look to the lives of the fathers, for ours are but a shadow of theirs upon the earth. The average person becomes what they hated, because that's the power person dynamic. That's the codependent dynamic. Forgiveness cracks all that. Forgiveness breaks all of that down and removes all of that. We had Carolyn call in from Washington State yesterday, or Friday. It was an awesome call. Carolyn had called us 2 weeks earlier and had a daughter and a son that were angry, enraged. And Carolyn was like, they just make me so angry and they cause me so much pain. So, well, Carolyn, would you like to be responsible for your anger and your pain? Well, but they do it to me. No, Carolyn, that's yours. And Carolyn started doing worksheets 2 weeks ago. She called us on Friday and shared on the show that she'd contacted her daughter, and her daughter just puked all this rage up. And Carolyn is in a space of love. Carolyn isn't doing her pain and rage and fear thing anymore. Carolyn has forgiven that. Now, will there be other layers of that come up? Yeah, very possibly. But Carolyn's probably, and there'll probably be more work for her to do around it. But here she is with a daughter enraged that 2 weeks earlier it was her daughter's fault. The minute she realized, no, this is mine, all of a sudden she's freed from her painful response to her daughter's rage. And she becomes the space of love. Guess what the greatest gift you can offer another human being is? If they're in pain, if they're in turmoil, and any kind of aberrant behavior you can imagine. I don't care whether it's the angry gang member. I don't care whether it's the prison, the guy in prison. I don't care if it's a smart mouth kid, whoever it is. The only reason they're doing any of it is because they haven't yet discovered their human lives and they're functioning out of their generational pain. The gift you can give to them is if their pain brings something painful up in you, you can be freed of that pain through forgiveness. Again, go to whyagain.com. On the right-hand side, there's a link that says download worksheets. If you want to know how that process works, then commit yourself to doing it. Until you're committed, and I mean commitment that will carry you through all the resistance and all the times where you say, no, I don't want to look at that in myself. I don't want to feel that. I don't want to deal with that. Make a commitment. And if you make that commitment, I promise you this, you will change your whole family bloodline, your whole family system. You will open a space that is so awesome, it's almost unimaginable. And so those who are in the chat room who are talking about this, your conversation's right on target. How do I refrain from doing this to my children? When the stress is up and the chips are down, I will tend to do exactly what my power person did to me that I hated the most. That's what's in my dissociated mind. That's what will force me into behavior. If I don't wait until the stress is up and the chips are down and I forgive, I can crack open that part of my mind. I can remove that behavior. And then when my child does whatever it is that brings that stress up in me, I can be the space of love for them. You know, your conversation is absolutely right on target. And please, please, please start to understand forgiveness and never forgive anybody ever again. And people say, well, Michael, that sounds like a conflict. No, there's no conflict in that at all once you have the brain cells. This is not about you did something terrible that caused all this pain inside of me, but I'll let you off the hook. I'll forgive you. That has nothing whatsoever to do with forgiveness. This is about how do I go inside myself and remove my pain? Gee, you know what you just said, what you just did brought this huge amount of pain up in me. I'm willing to function out of my human life instead of this pain, so I'm going to forgive. And the worksheet is a technology. It is a tool that we finally decoded out of the Aramaic that shows us how to undo those parts of our genetics that never belonged in the human life and to bring our human lives, the awesome presence of love that we are, forward in our family systems. And it's so urgent this time of year. You know, the highest rates of suicide are around the holidays coming up this next month, this holiday that just passed. It's when families get together and all the power person dynamics, all the good old family feelings start to surface that we try to avoid. My request of you is commit through this holiday season. Pick up the pen. Go to the website. Pick up the pen. Download, print that worksheet. Print off enough to do 5 a day for the next 40 days. That's 200 worksheets. We'll be here to support you. If questions come up, if things you don't understand, if things surface that you don't know how to handle, we're absolutely here to support you in that process. Let's join as a community in doing this. And as you do that, you will be in the process of creating what a human life is supposed to be, and that is the ever-increasing capacity to experience the active presence of love, because that's what you are, and we're here to support you. Have the best year yet of your eternal life, and bless you. Thanks for being with us. Bring a stranger tomorrow.
Thank you for listening to Mind Shifters Radio with the Forgiveness Doctor, Dr. Michael Ryce, and his wife, Jeanie, who present the internal Aramaic process of forgiveness. Michael and Jeanie are here every Monday through Friday on Earth Angels Radio. For more on Michael and Jeanie, please visit www.whyagain.com. That's www.whyagain.com.